Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the new MDs, moms, doctors, and scientists working together to heal our children, to heal our families. We have a special 1-year episode today. Congratulations, ladies, and everybody who's been watching us. And we so appreciate our special guest, Dr. John Fagan, today. It is Halloween, October 31st. It is our 13th episode on Halloween. We love the numbers and the synchronicity with getting out some very frightening fast food results today with Dr. John Fagan of Health Research Institute, the laboratory who conducted and or coordinated the majority of the fast food testing and the school lunch testing we did last year. Dr. John Fagan, if we could put that up one more time, is a co-founder and CEO and chief scientist of Health Research Institute. The Health Research Institute employs cutting-edge mass spectromic and molecular genetic approaches to make the invisible visible. I love that tagline. The new scientific knowledge we generate catalyzes transformation in both the biomedical and the nutritional food agriculture sectors. And he is the author of 2 books, GMO Myths, and what was the name of the other one? I don't have that up there. Genetic Engineering, the Hazards of Vedic Engineering and the Solutions by Dr. John Fagan. Welcome, Dr. Fagan. Can we hear you? Did you say hello? I can't hear you. No, we don't have your sound. How come all of a sudden we don't have your sound? Mm-hmm. No, it's been cut off. We heard you just
it's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, there we are.
Great pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Fagan. We appreciate that. You just muted yourself, so we need you to unmute. Okay, there you are. We can hear you.
I don't know.
It's sort of going in and out, though. It's sort of wobbly. Now we can't hear you.
Yeah, maybe, John, maybe you want to jump out and jump back in. It's a bad connection.
Yeah. So you can jump out and jump back in while I start giving a little background on the school lunch testing that we did last year. And that was really one of our first episodes, I believe, was last year with the school lunch testing. And the reason why we did the testing of school lunches was because we're extremely concerned about the childhood illness, chronic illness epidemic in America. 54% of children have a chronic illness, as Dr. Michelle Perro can tell you all about from her book, What's Making Our Children Sick. And we realized that there's 30 million meals, GMO meals, basically being served to our children every day through school lunches. So we figured that is a large target to go after. If we're going to transform the food industry, we might as well start with one of the biggest sectors of the food industry. And we found some very shocking results with school lunch testing, 95.3% positive for glyphosate, 74% positive for harmful for harmful pesticides, a very high number of heavy metals positive in school lunches, very low minerals. And we didn't test for vitamins at that time, but we learned that the low mineral content was probably largely due to the spraying of glyphosate as a drying agent on our food supply and glyphosate on GMOs. And Stephanie Seneff is the author of Toxic Legacy. And so she is our glyphosate expert in residence right here, how the weed killer glyphosate is destroying our health and the environment. Dr. Stephanie Seneff, she is a senior scientist at MIT. And so we're very grateful to have this team. And for me, a mother, I'm the author of the book, Unstoppable, Transforming Sickness and Struggle into Triumph, Empowerment, and a Celebration of Community. I'm a mother who got worried because my kids were sick and began to do research. Like they say, worried mom does better research than the FBI. But I leaned on the advice and the knowledge of people like Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Michelle Perro, and then collaborated with Dr. John Fagan to do this testing. So for me, this is kind of dreamy to be able to discuss the results with scientists and doctors and researchers. So I'm very excited about today's episode, and I hope that we can have a discussion that's beneficial to everybody watching today. And we hope that you will share this episode with everybody that you know in your family. So with that said, that was a school lunch testing, and we went on to do fast food testing because in the process of doing school lunch testing, not only did we learn that 85 million Americans eat fast food every day, but that fast food companies are often the suppliers of school lunch food. And that's 30 million meals a day to our children. So we asked Dr. John Fagan if he and his lab could coordinate. They also involved other labs to test for glyphosate, 236 different pesticides, 104 different veterinary drugs and hormones, the top 4 heavy metals, also minerals, about 6 different vitamin Bs. I think it was about a dozen different minerals. And we had another lab test for PFAS and phthalates, which the results are still pending. And he also conducted testing on calories, fats, and protein. So a lot of data, which we are still digging through. Honestly, we just got a researcher today who's volunteering to look more into the data. But let's just get right into the fast food test results. Dr. John Fagan, do we have you? Are you able to speak and we can hear you now?
Yes, I think you can hear me now.
Yes, great. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So, but before I get into the results, could you just say a little bit about why you started Health Research Institute and what motivates you? I mean, to be honest, we've asked a lot of labs to do a lot of things and most of them just don't want to test. What has you have the courage to be willing to take on testing things that are going to be pretty controversial?
We do it because it's needed. We need to have this knowledge as human beings, as mothers and fathers, to make sure our children can be healthy and our families can be healthy. And what we realized is that advocacy organizations and many others, individual citizens, have a very hard time finding laboratories that are willing to give impartial, balanced, high quality results. And so what we did is to create a lab. The working name for it was the People's Lab. And so we really started it to fill that need and also to look very deeply at how food is produced and the connection between the methods of production and the quality, the nutrition, the safety of the food that comes out of that. So that's what we've worked to do, basically. And we feel it's very important, as important today as it was 7 years ago when we started.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you for doing that. And I'm going to jump right into the first results that we released just recently, a few weeks ago, was the veterinary drugs and hormone testing that we did. And we did that only on the top 10 of the most popular fast food brands because it is quite expensive. But we did test McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, Subway, Burger King, Domino's, Wendy's, Dunkin', Chipotle, and Taco Bell. And we found Niacin in 60% of the top 10 samples. And Niacin is an ionophore antibiotic. And also Niacin was in 4 out of the top 10, so 40% of the top 10 samples, even though some were only trace amounts. Even trace amounts is very concerning to moms across America. And do we have a definition of the ionophore? There we go. John, can you explain this just a little bit about what an ionophore is?
Yeah, ionophores are compounds that carry other compounds across the cellular membranes primarily. And so they will bind, especially there are some compounds that interact well with membranes, like the ionophores, and some lipids, some fats. But there are many others, like metal ions and things like that, that don't really enter or cross those membranes easily. And the ionophores are like little transporters for those, and they move them across the membrane. And this can be a good thing if it's the right metal, or it can be a really bad thing, if it's carrying lead or cadmium or some other thing like that.
Well, this is an antibiotic ionophore, which is right, going to be transporting antibiotics through cell membranes. Is that correct?
Well, actually, it is an antibiotic.
Right. Okay.
The reason that it's an antibiotic is that one of the things that antibiotics can carry are protons, which are which are ions that are very important in the energy processes of the cell. And when that gets all messed up, the cell cannot, and the plant cannot produce the energy that it needs to live properly. And so it kills it. And so that particular ionophore is killing the plant by, by carrying the wrong ions across the cell membranes.
Right. Well, the research that I found with these particular ionophores, monicin and niacin, they're an antibiotic, and they are given to beef and dairy cattle very often because it helps them gain weight. They swell up and gain weight. However, at very low levels, extremely low levels is what the document says, it is toxic and can be fatal and causes damage to horses and dogs at very low levels. It causes their hind legs to go paralyzed, to be dysfunctional. So, I mean, how concerned were you when you found this in the food that 85 million Americans are likely eating every day?
I was very concerned because of just what you said. And as you're aware, there are, people also have problems with their hind legs. And maybe there's a connection. That's something that could be the case. What do you call it, Michelle? Neuropathy? Is that the right word? Yeah.
Yeah, it just basically means some inflammation in the neurologic system. And we have plenty of reasons to suspect why that happens, even with the other effects of these drugs. But absolutely, and certainly we're seeing a lot of bizarre neurologic issues now. They're not benign and affecting children and adults and our animal companions.
Yeah, and antibiotics. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, just remember that the function of nerves also depends on the ions that are present in the nerve cell versus the ions that are present outside. And an ionophore is going to break down that and put the wrong ions in the wrong place, basically. So that's one way they can cause these problems.
Well, that sounds like a disaster also in conjunction with these ionophores being an antibiotic. These are antibiotics and they're destroying the gut bacteria. And Stephanie, I'm sure will weigh in on that with glyphosate on what's going on in the microbiome. That is not good.
Right. And, you mentioned the plants, but I think things that affect the plants also affect the microbes. And that's certainly true for glyphosate. And the same things that it does to the plants, it does to the microbes, and that causes them to get disrupted. And I think these ionophores are similar in that they're also killing the bacteria by virtue of causing these ions to be on the wrong side of the fence. And so it's the same concept as glyphosate. Glyphosate is a chelator, and it holds on to metals, and it prevents both the microbes and the plants from getting the minerals that they need to be healthy.
Right.
Right. In addition, we found or your lab actually found a anti-parasitic that's used to treat cocciditis. It's a common chicken parasite, but it's not just an anti-parasitic. It's actually a known aviary contraceptive. It prevents birds from laying eggs. And this is extremely concerning. Yeah, so they can't give it to chickens that are egg-laying chickens because they will not lay eggs, but they do give it to pigeons and geese around airports and, city capitals all around the world, in Canada and in Europe. They know that this particular veterinary drug called Ramazzini is an aviary contraceptive, and this was found in a Chick-fil-A sandwich. And even though it was at low levels, I would say this is extremely concerning. Can you talk a little bit about finding an aviary contraceptive in human food? What do you think about that, Dr. Fagan?
It's shocking. It really is to see, the regulators will say, oh, it's just a trace, and so we don't have to worry about it. But that there's an old saying that the dose makes the poison. In other words, if something is at a high dose, it's dangerous, and if it's at a low dose, it isn't. But the reality is that many compounds can be highly toxic or highly disruptive to the physiology, even in traces. And we'll touch on some examples of that, some other examples of that as we go on today. But that's certainly a worry about this aviary contraceptive, as well as.
Yeah, that's the first question I'm getting. I'm doing a lot of media for this, and a lot of, radio hosts and other people are asking, well, what is that doing to humans? And I'm like, great question. We don't know. And I can't imagine it's doing anything good. I can't imagine that it's not contributing to, I mean, there's this book written by Dr. Shauna Swan called, Countdown, right? It's all about the decline of sperm, the decline of fertility and men and women in America today. That men's sperm quality is 50% of what their grandfathers were. Women are experiencing miscarriages and, reproductive therapies at the highest rates ever known. I mean, I can't imagine that it's doing anything good. So we want to move on to other results. But before we do, I have a note here. Michelle, you wanted to talk about the microbiome and its connection to the body's production of vitamin Bs, amongst others. Can you expand on that?
Well, it came from the studies then. So when you report out the study, we see these 0 levels of B9 and B12, which we'll let Stephanie address in a minute. But I want to focus on one of them was really low levels, super low, of B3. And you need all the B vitamins to run on biology. But B3 is niacin, and niacin is converted into NAD, and NAD is found in almost over 400 reactions in our body. It's involved in gut health, neurologic health, the metabolism of fats. We use it in treating high triglycerides, high LDLs, high cholesterol issues. We use niacin. And we also know for neurologic issues, for example, we have found that kids with schizophrenia have extremely low levels of B3. But what's of interest here is that B3 is also made by microbes, those gut bacteria, in particular Bacteroides. And we know, and other microbes too, not just Bacteroides, many gut microbes make B3. And we know that glyphosate kills off at least 50% of them. But so we know that we don't have B3 killing off the microbes. The microbes can't make this. They also can't make tryptophan. And tryptophan is what makes the chemicals that run our brain, the neurotransmitters.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. But one cool thing that you may not know is I just spoke about the baby biome recently, is that we know that infants and kids who do better have high levels of this Bacteroides fragilis, the one that makes B3, and kids who are not doing well have low levels of Bacteroides fragilis. And Bacteroides fragilis makes B3. And we know B3 is needed particularly for neurologic health. So all of this matters. And don't forget, microbes make vitamins. They make B12, they make niacin, etc. So the fact that we're giving our kids antibiotics and they work in even small doses. And please, let's remember, let's emphasize again, Dr. Fagan's point, dose does not make the poison. Those effects happen even at very low levels, particularly with hormones. Hormones run it in the nanosphere. Super low levels can affect everyone.
And how is that affecting children, for instance, like stages going through puberty and things like that?
Well, thank you so much, because we're giving kids hormones at these super low levels of, contraceptives and another hormones. And what are we seeing? We're seeing endocrine disruption in children. How is that manifested? Glad you asked. Early puberty. We have girls 8 years old beginning puberty. Boys too. It's not just girls. Boys entering puberty 12. It used to be 16. And so now we have all these kids in puberty earlier. Now it's happening in middle school instead of high school. So that endocrine disruption also can affect metabolic issues, metabolic syndrome, and issues regarding obesity and metabolic disorders. So this is profound. Hormones in our body are all linked. They all work almost like a chorus. It's a beautifully orchestrated symphony. And when one goes awry, they can all fall out of place. So don't want to see those contraceptives in our kids' food, Zan.
Right. Absolutely not a good idea. Okay. Well, the next batch of testing that we did.
Why don't you let me talk a bit about this as well, because I want to mention the NAD.
Yeah. Sure.
NAD, it can also be made from tryptophan. So tryptophan not only makes serotonin, but it also makes NAD, the same thing as niacin makes. And the microbes can't make the tryptophan because glyphosate's a direct hit on that. So that's another reason why the NAD would be low in the food, but also your gut microbes are impaired in their ability to make the tryptophan, which is going to also impact the NAD. And NAD is incredibly important in the mitochondria. They use a ton of NAD to supply the mitochondria with healthy protons. And so this is very, very important for the mitochondria to not They don't have enough NAD, then you're going to have mitochondrial dysfunction.
And mitochondrial dysfunction is about how the body produces energy, correct?
That's right. The mitochondria make the ATP that fuels the cell. And many diseases are associated with mitochondrial dysfunction, many diseases, and the ones that are prevalent today in particular. And that can be a direct consequence of the inadequate supply of NAD, which is coming from the tryptophan and from the niacin, both of which are suppressed, are not available in these foods. So the glyphosate's in the food as well, so it's going to affect the microbes to prevent them from providing the tryptophan to make the NAD.
So are you saying if we get glyphosate out of the food supply and we get vitamin B3s or B complexes into the food supply, we're going to eliminate a lot of diseases?
Right, and we can do both of those at the same time, because the glyphosate is probably what's disrupting the availability of NAD, of niacin in the plants. It's probably a big reason why they don't have enough niacin in that food. And the same thing with the folate and the B12, cobalamin. So folate is B9, cobalamin is B12. Cobalamin deficiency can cause a dementia that looks like Alzheimer's disease. And you can fix it just by getting that cobalamin up to speed. Many elderly people that have issues with thinking, foggy brain, their problem might be completely dependent upon cobalamin deficiency. And cobalamin was dead zero, as far as I understand. Cobalamin, B9 and B12 were practically absent, undetectable in those food samples. Isn't that right? Folate, of course, is
B9 and B12. Mm-hmm.
Both of them are essential for the methylation pathways, and the methylation pathways are often disrupted in autism. That's a very common feature of autistic kids, that they have disrupted methylation pathways. Those pathways are extremely important in the body. And I wanted to say one more thing, which is this issue of the endocrine disruptors that are dangerous at extremely low levels. They're actually much more toxic at low levels than at higher levels. And the industry actually defined a rule back in the 1970s, which helped them out with glyphosate, to say, if you didn't see toxicity, you study animal studies, you don't see any toxic effects at a certain level, then you don't have to look any lower than that. And I think they made that rule because they found out that when they did look lower, they found more toxicity. It's at the very low levels that they start to imitate hormones, and then they become endocrine disruptors. At the higher levels, they don't. So that's very peculiar. The dose makes the poison is not true. It's not true.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. That's very clear. Okay, so the next results that I want to talk about, and we will get into vitamin B3 when we get to those results, but the next results we released were the glyphosate and pesticide results, and we found glyphosate in 100% of the top 20 fast food brands. They were positive for glyphosate herbicides. 76% were positive for harmful pesticides. And that little chart you can see under there is the top line, which is the highest line, is the U.S., and that's the amount of money that we're spending on healthcare. And so we have an extraordinary amount of money that we're spending on healthcare compared to the rest of the world, almost twice the amount, if not 3 times the amount of most other countries. And yet we have the worst health. And we also have the highest number of assaults by deaths by assault, violent deaths. So in this study, we talked about the glyphosate levels in the food supply. The highest levels, folks, were in Panera sandwiches. And Panera claims to be one of the most wholesome, good ingredient foods. They have done a lot of work on eliminating many different types of chemicals and preservatives in their food. They have like a no-no list, which is really great. We're happy to see that. But the highest levels detected of glyphosate in all of the top 20 food brands were in Panera bread. That's 213.58 parts per billion in one sample and 225.53 in another sample, and totaling 439.11. Just by comparison, Chipotle's only had 4.65 parts per billion for both samples, and that was a whopping 94.4 times lower than Panera bread. So we believe that level is coming from the glyphosate being sprayed on wheat as a drying agent. And our panelists will talk more about that. But I want to mention that the next lowest levels were Panda Express and McDonald's. They had 4.7 and 5.58 respectively. I don't know how McDonald's got away with having such low levels of glyphosate. Not sure how that happened. And then the total amount of glyphosate for the 42 fast food samples was over was 2,089 parts per billion, a level over 20,000 times higher than the amount that's been found to cause severe organ damage by Seralini and their team. And so, you know, what we're asserting is that eating this fast food even once a week could be greatly contributing to liver disease and organ damage, according to Michael Antonou's studies and many other studies out there. So very concerning results. 223 parts per billion was Arby's, the next highest levels. Burger King had a total of 71 parts per billion. Dairy Queen, 126. Dunkin' Donuts, 133. So, you know, these are levels that are far above the 0.1 parts per billion that has been shown to cause organ damage and sex hormone changes. John, have you ever found 100% of samples that you tested in a batch positive for glyphosate before?
This is surprising, actually. You know, we've seen high percentages because glyphosate is used as a desiccant in almost all legumes and grains, and therefore you see it a lot. But it just says that fast food is really pretty junky food. It's at the low end of the quality chain. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, and desiccant means a drying agent. They spray it on the crop, the grains, the peas, the wheat, the beans, the oats, the chickpeas, especially mung beans, lentils, things like that before harvesting so that they can harvest it faster. And the problem is it doesn't wash dry or cook off. So, Stephanie, why is being exposed to glyphosate on a consistent basis so detrimental to human health?
Oh my God.
Yeah, you can sum up your whole book.
Read my book.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I think, you know, it really is amazing to me that all these decades, it's been decades, glyphosate's been on the market since the mid-1970s. And it went up dramatically around the turn of the century when they introduced all these GMO Roundup Ready crops. But then it's showing up in highest numbers on these crops that are sprayed right before the harvest, like the garbanzo beans and the chickpeas. Canada did a huge study, and they found the highest levels consistently on these legumes, which people think are healthy foods. You know, hummus is considered to be a healthy food. It would be, but it's going to have lots of glyphosate unless it's organic. And glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. That's actually been very clear. And Zen, you gave a nice set of slides. I don't remember where that was, but you gave a nice set of slides showing that glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. There's lots of papers coming out very recently, actually. There's a tremendous birth of new literature on glyphosate coming out recently that I'm very excited about because they're really revealing. People are finally aware, researchers are aware that this stuff is not safe. And the government has been misled by Monsanto, and now it's Bayer, all these years, that they've just decided, oh yeah, it's all over the food supply, we don't care because it's harmless to humans. I mean, they've got that message so deep, so entrenched that they're not bothering to even open up that door and take a look. And it's just very, very frustrating to me that we see. I am absolutely confident that when I say glyphosate is a major player in the autism epidemic and also in the celiac disease and the gluten intolerance and the casein intolerance, all of these things that we're seeing so clearly in our children and that are, I think, a direct hit from glyphosate. Now, other things are contributing, but I think glyphosate's number one. If we could get that out of the food supply, we would see a tremendous improvement in things like autism, ADHD, violent behavior, because serotonin deficiency is linked to violent behavior. And we have a huge problem with, you know, shootouts in the United States. It's just amazing how many times we hear these. It's now become old news. Oh yeah, another shootout, another 18 people died, you know, big deal. I mean, it's just amazing how easily we accept this outrageous behavior that can be connected to serotonin deficiency. And serotonin comes from tryptophan, which is in that pathway that gets disrupted in the gut microbes, and it's going to be low in the food. As we saw, the niacin is low. These things will lead to violent behavior. So we've got a lot of reasons why we don't want glyphosate in our food.
And there's new studies showing that glyphosate is directly linked to dementia and depression. We know that farmers have the highest levels of suicides of all of the careers in the United States due to their exposure to pesticides. And the number one pesticide is glyphosate. So we're seeing an increasing number of studies connecting that suicide and depression. I'm so sorry. Our researcher just told me today, the one I just connected with, his brother committed suicide this weekend. And, you know, he is he is compelled to do this work to get the word out because he knows these toxins in the food supply are contributing to tragedies like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that many of us, all of us on this panel, are motivated by love, though, not by fear, for our family members and for health. And so that's why I'm so honored to be speaking with you. Next, I want to talk about heavy metals. And I know Michelle has a lot to say about that and the probably illegality of the results. If we could show the heavy metals page. There we go. Thank you. So we tested the top 20 fast food brands for heavy metals, and 100% of them were positive for lead or cadmium, actually for lead and cadmium. Some only had trace levels of lead, but as the good doctor will tell you, that even trace amounts are extremely concerning and can develop in delays in physical or mental development. They can have kidney problems, high blood pressure, kidney damage, skin damage. All kinds of problems come from these heavy metals. And the levels were highest in actually the In-N-Out French fries. And we believe this is because potatoes and sweet potatoes are in the ground, and they can much more easily absorb heavy metals in the ground from heavy metals in the fertilizers, heavy metals in the, heavy metals have been found in Roundup, in glyphosate. So if it's been sprayed on the ground at all, those heavy metals can stay there for years, along with glyphosate. And so that's very problematic. Another high level was found, the highest level of lead was found in a Sonic cheeseburger, and lead can often accumulate in the bone marrows of animals and in the meat. And so, of course, bones can be ground up and put, in the burgers. And so we're very concerned about the cadmium and lead levels. Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about your concerns and how this is really a big deal, not just for children's health? Maybe you can mention a little bit about children's health and toxicity of heavy metals, but also how this might not be legal at all. What's happening?
Yeah. This was really, I think, of all the shocking things that, Moms Across America found, this one really rattled my cage, because there's no safe heavy metal level, period. There's no little lead, little cadmium, little arsenic, little cobalt. None of them were safe. And to see that much cadmium is really hard to get out of the body. And it's extremely toxic. And it's not just a neurotoxin, and we know all the neurologic issues that kids are having, but it's a carcinogen. They cause cancer. And what we don't know is when you have all these heavy metals combined, the cadmium, the lead, the arsenic, which is what you found, that we don't see what happens when there are more than one toxic elements. And so the toxicity from these substances is neurotoxic, carcinogenic, mental health, gut health. It's global physiologic disaster for children to be exposed to these heavy metals. And they're very hard to chelate out. This is not an easy thing to do. But when we were presenting to the Hill the data that we found to our Senate congressional briefing, when we were doing that research, what I found was that the EPA itself, this was like a shocking thing, passed something called the Toxic Substances Control Act in 1976, and then Obama amended it in 2016. And basically what it says is, and I'm going to read it because I put it up here because I was so shocked, that the EPA has the authority to require reporting and record keeping and testing requirements and restrictions related to chemical substances and mixtures, but they excluded food, drugs, cosmetics, and pesticides. But what they didn't exclude were heavy metals. And they talked about lead and lead-based paint, but they talked about heavy metals. So as per the EPA's own TSCA compliance, school lunches, fast foods don't meet the requirements. So the EPA, by its own act of 1976 and 2016, is required to ban and restrict these products because these substances pose a substantial risk of injury to health or the environment to meet and to make an act immediately. That's what the EPA says. It's from their own website. So what we're saying here, correct me if I'm wrong, EPA, do your job. These ingredients, toxic ingredients, they are ingredients. And so let's get rid of them because they do harm by your own act. And so that's what we have to remind everyone. And I can remind you as well that we do test children for lead. We do that routinely, and thank goodness we do it. But we don't do it for cadmium, mercury, arsenic. And most conventional mainstream physicians are not well versed in how you test for heavy metal toxicity. And we know that kids with neurologic injury have high levels of heavy metal when you test them. And so this is out of mainstream medicine. The only ones we do in mainstream are iron overload and lead. And that's about it.
No,
And you
so
only
there's
need
definitely
a small amount of lead to cause neurologic injury.
So there's definitely a lacking in testing in humans as well. And I noted from my testing my own father for heavy metals that aluminum is often left out. And we unfortunately did that in this testing as well. Aluminum is a separate test usually for heavy metals. So John, we'd like to include that next time. If we have to,
You'll do that.
Or we need to include it because we want to know the aluminum levels that are in foods as well.
Last point of where these things are coming from, let's not forget biosludge. We put biosludge, which is full of those contaminants, including pharmaceuticals, as fertilizer, not on organics, on fields. And when they're applied, because I've been in Iowa, no offense, John, when they're putting that stuff down, and oh my gosh, that smell, and you can smell it miles.
Oh, it's horrible.
And if you want to be horrified, watch the movie Biosludge. I mean, that if that doesn't change people's minds about switching to organic regenerative, I don't know what will.
Okay. All right. And Stephanie, you wanted to talk a little bit about, can you say more about heavy metals and autism in the brain?
Yes. Well, in fact, I remember reading about dialysis fluid, which was really interesting to me because dialysis fluid, people who are on dialysis were developing this dementia. They found the correlation between the dialysis and the dementia. And so they did research to figure out what was going on there. And what they found was that it was the aluminum that was naturally in the water that was being used in the dialysis process that was introducing aluminum into their bodies and getting into their brain and causing this dementia. So aluminum is very, very clearly tied to dementia. And aluminum toxicity in the food is going to be a very serious problem, especially if you have glyphosate in the mix as well. And I've written an article about glyphosate binding to aluminum. There's a paper that shows 2 glyphosate molecules surrounding an aluminum atom and making the whole thing a neutrally charged, an uncharged small molecule. Aluminum has a +3 charge, which makes it hard for it to get across the gut barrier. But once you surround it with a couple of glyphosates, it's an easy ride to get across the barrier. And glyphosate opens up the barrier, causes leaky gut. So the combination of those 2 things is going to let the aluminum that you eat get out of the gut into the circulation, and then a leaky brain barrier follows as well. And so the glyphosate is going to deliver the aluminum to the brain. And there's studies on autistic brains post-mortem that showed remarkably high levels of aluminum in the autistic brains, just as they see in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. So I think that aluminum could be a major factor in the autism epidemic, and glyphosate could be making it worse. And I should mention mercury too, because glyphosate disrupts the body's ability to detoxify mercury because it messes up sulfation pathways. And that causes mercury to become very, very toxic. So it makes the mercury that you're exposed to much more toxic as a consequence of the glyphosate. So glyphosate does this to a lot of things. I think that's one reason why glyphosate is so bad, is because almost everything else gets worse if glyphosate is around to mess things up.
So I want to understand that. So glyphosate prevents the body from detoxing heavy metals, and it's either the same function or it's in addition to, but it also amplifies the harmful impact of other environmental toxins.
Right, in many ways. But the thing with the aluminum is that it binds to it and it hides its +3 charge, which makes it very easy to get it across the barrier. That's something citrate does too, and it's well known that citrate can help aluminum get past the gut barrier. Citrate and glyphosate have that same property of being negatively charged, binding to the aluminum, hiding that metal, and disguising it really, sort of like a Trojan horse to get the metal past the barriers and into places where it's going to cause damage.
So insidious. John, don't you feel like if more lab owners could have a conversation with Stephanie and Michelle and myself, that they would be more motivated to test and have the courage to test?
Well, when your income depends on pleasing people who are worried about aluminum, that's a problem. But the good lab operators would have that effect. And I know there are some good ones out there as well.
Right. Okay. Well, we need to move on to nutrients and minerals, but
before we do, there's just one thing that I wanted to emphasize about the heavy metals. One sentence. And that is that, as parents, I'm not a parent, unfortunately, but as parents, I think people are very protective of their own children, but children in general. And when you learn, as we have learned in our research, that even the lowest amount of lead that a child is taking in with their food is going to lower their IQ permanently. This is if it's in the early stages of development. It's going to lower their IQ. And in so doing, it changes their whole life. It puts them on a weaker trajectory for all of the things that are important to life. Your interactions with other people, your ability, even your ability to make money in your profession, all of these things. So that to me was the most poignant observation from this particular part of the research, is that we found lead at some level in every sample.
Yeah.
That needs to change. It needs to change.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
No. I actually forgot to ask you. We went straight to Michelle and then to Stephanie. So, and the cadmium, as you were saying, is highly carcinogenic. We're seeing cancer rates skyrocketing in children. I mean, that's never used to be. It used to be only older people that got cancer. So we're seeing a explosion of child leukemia, but we are going to get to that study in a little bit after we finish the fast food test results. But yes, we're seeing a much higher levels of cancer. Before we move on from heavy metals, though, Michelle did want to talk a little bit about the possibility of mercury in high fructose corn syrup. Could you say why that might be a problem, Michelle?
Yeah, boy, but that one shook me up. So I've been on the rag about this high fructose corn syrup forever. It's such a toxic element for kids, associated with liver disorders in children. It's in ultra processed foods. It's in our kids' school lunches, high fructose corn syrup. But in about 2016 or 2017, a whistleblower who worked for the EPA, her name is Renee Dufault, she exposed the fact that we use mercury to extract the substances needed to produce this high fructose corn syrup. And it was an unknown fact. And she wrote a book, and she's going to be joining us next month to discuss this, called Unsafe at Any Meal, which we're very honored to have her next month. But I think we can give a little kind of preview here that so kids are eating this high fructose corn syrup, which is liver toxic. And now what they don't know, that none of us knew, that it's also contaminated with mercury. And mercury, again, neurotoxic, extremely toxic, and even the most minute amounts of mercury. And here are kids ingesting it, eating these ultra processed foods every day. As you said, Zen, 30 million meals a day served at school, and then 85, I think it was 65 or maybe 85 million fast food meals a day. Was it 65 or 85? A lot.
85 million. 85 million. Yeah.
85 million. And not to mention that Americans spend about half their income eating out. And what they're eating out is this. So this is what we're feeding our children. Then we want to know what's making our kids sick. So I just want to make that point, and we'll take that up further regarding maybe government regulation and who's guarding the hen house.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, next we want to move on to vitamins and minerals. We tested for all 20 for the top minerals, but we only tested the top 10 for vitamin B and calories. And as we suspected, the minerals were very low. And as Dr. Don Huber, who's a 60-year plant pathologist who studies minerals and content in soil and in plants all the time, he said that the fast food results were, the fast food that was tested was clearly lower than needed to meet the recommended daily requirements of calcium, potassium, magnesium, copper, zinc, and iron. And for instance, I just grabbed one of them, copper, that's essential for brain function. It was so low that an adult would have to eat 9 servings of Chick-fil-A chicken nuggets in order to receive the recommended daily allowance of copper for a day. And copper is essential for balancing zinc. Zinc and copper are very important for the balance of zinc. And across the board, if you test any kid with autism, you'll find an imbalance mostly of zinc and copper. So for me, that one was one that stood out. But we do have an analyst looking at more data on the mineral levels, but across the board, they were quite low. And as we mentioned earlier, vitamin B and 12 zero amounts of vitamin B and 12 were detected in any of the top 10 fast food samples. And deficiencies of these vitamins can lead to fatigue, digestive issues, cardiac health issues, nervous system disorders, essentially erratic behavior, fatigue, trouble concentrating, and poor mood as well. So, so that was some of the vitamins and minerals. The rest of the vitamin Bs, there were abysmally low levels of vitamin B1, B2, B3, and B5 and B6. And these deficiencies can lead to fatigue, weakness, rashes, nausea, diarrhea, irritability, and depression. And I think, as I already mentioned, because I've said it so many times, I'm not sure, but for a woman to meet the USDA recommended daily intake of 14 milligrams of vitamin B3, she would need to consume 330 Chick-fil-A sandwiches in a day. And for a man to meet the recommended daily intake of 16 milligrams of vitamin B3, he would have to consume 380 Chick-fil-A sandwiches in a day. Can you tell us first, John, because a lot of people, when I say that, they're like, is that math correct? Are you sure about that? Can you just walk us through a little bit of how we figured out that it would take 333 Chick-fil-A sandwiches to meet the vitamin B3 recommended daily intake in one day? How did you figure that out?
Well, it's simple. We measure the level of that vitamin in the sample. And then we look at, okay, now for George to get the vitamin B that he needs, the vitamin B9 or 12 or 3 that he needs, they need 16 micrograms, okay? Now you're getting so many tenths of a microgram from one sample, or hundredths of a microgram from one Chick-fil-A sandwich. So how many of those sandwiches do you need in order to come to the level of 16 micrograms? It's pretty simple. You divide what's in the sample into what they need to get, and it comes out to, what was that number?
333 for women and 380 for men.
380 for men. So
yeah, the amount was 0.02, I think, milligrams. It was, right, of vitamin B3 found.
Yeah, so you divide 0.02, and for women it was 12 micrograms. Is that right?
14, and for men it was 16.
Yeah, so you divide 0.02 into 14, and you come out with 333.
Yeah.
So it's a huge number. Obviously, when you eat all of that, you're going to get a lot of other toxins.
Yes.
And that's going to make you sicker.
Yeah.
And
corn syrup.
One point that's worth pointing out is that most of these products have more glyphosate in them or other toxins than they have vitamins. The level of toxins is higher than the level of vitamins in these products.
It's very disturbing. There's more toxins in these fast food samples than there are nutrients in most cases.
Yeah, it's empty nutrients, and that's the problem with the school lunches. And when you realize that for 30% of the school population, that lunch is the big meal of the day. It's their best meal of the day, and they're not getting anything. It just is absolutely frustrating that this could happen anywhere in the world, but for it to happen in a prosperous country like the U.S., it's unconscionable.
And what really makes me mad is that the CEOs of these companies, for instance, McDonald's CEO back in 2017, it was recorded that he was making $21.8 million a year. That's $1.8 million a month. And the fast food workers, probably the parents of some of these kids in schools that are only eating, school lunch meals a day, they're so broke. They're making less than about $2,000 a month. They're making $26,000 a year, not even. And the numbers show that the average American is spending $10,000 a year on healthcare. So how is somebody that's making $26,000 a year spending $10,000 a year on healthcare, almost half their income? And how are they expected to be able to buy healthy food and to be able to get, new socks and underwear on their kids and pay for the heating bill. And, like, this is why many of the teachers that I know, and I respect public school teachers, both my parents were public school teachers, but today's public school teachers should be paid 100 times more, because what they're dealing with is not just teaching the kids, they're dealing with and not just autism problems. One out of 36 kids now have autism. They're dealing with trying to be able to meet the kids' basic needs, because the parents are so broke. These teachers are buying socks and underwear so that when the kids come to school smelling so badly because they don't have, they haven't taken a shower, they haven't washed their laundry in 2 weeks, the teachers are giving them these clothes, the socks and underwear. They have a box just for that, for the kids. And I believe this is because there's such disparity between people like the CEOs of McDonald's and the workers that are making a fraction of the amount of what they're making. And meanwhile, the parents are eating totally toxic food and probably have very high healthcare bills, and they're struggling with all of this. I could see why people would be mad at the government.
Yeah. And I think it's important to just kind of punctuate here, Zen, to your comment, which is so poignant, is that this is fixable, by the way. When we change children's diets and their families, they get better. When we put them on nutritious, nutrient-dense, organic, chemically free food, their health issues return, and they get better quickly. Within a few weeks, these issues resolve and the whole families get better. So it's not to say like, oh, can't fix it. Yeah, we can. And the kids get better quickly when you give them nutrient-dense food. And this is so powerful. I'm going to give you a quick thing. People who had inflammatory bowel disease, I don't want to go off in too many tangents, like Crohn's, and kids have a higher rate of autoimmune disease. When we give them enemas with vitamin B3, it can improve their colon health and their gut health, which is shocking. So these vitamins, and there is a bunch of literature on kids receiving B vitamins, improving mental health issues from psychotic issues, schizophrenia, bipolar disease, using nutrients alone without anything else. So let's be clear. When we switch their diets, these kids and families get better. We have the solution. We are solutionaries. It's not to say this can't be fixed. It has to be fixed. We know the problem. Here's the data. Now, what are we going to do about it? Because maybe we should get into what we do about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to share in closing with these results, because we don't have the phthalates and the PFAS testing back, and we don't really need to dive into calories and fats and proteins. Everybody knows that the fast food is way higher in calories than it needs to. It's too much, it's way too high in fats. It's not enough protein. And we'll have more results later regarding the phthalates. But I do want to share, as Michelle said, we had a mom call us and tell us that her son, when he was 9 years old, he had mental health issues, and she knew this, and she told the school, and they ignored her until the day that they called her and said, you need to come pick up your son from school because he just threatened to blow up the school with a bomb. And she said, well, I told you he has mental health issues. I need help. So they said, okay, we'll take him to a psychiatrist. Or go ahead and take him to a psychiatrist. So she did. And the psychiatrist said, here's his medication and, an SSRI, an antidepressant, for a 9-year-old. And she said, that's it? Isn't there anything else I can do? What about the side effects? And he said, well, it's either give him this medication or have him eat organic to avoid, toxic pesticides and chemicals. And because he asked her, what are you feeding him? And she said, pizza, hot dogs, tacos, quesadillas, all of that, whatever I can feed him because he's a healthy kid. And he said, well, you can either feed him organic to avoid the toxins in that food, or you can give him this medication. So she gave him she gave him organic food. She did not give him medication. She gave him organic food. And within 2 weeks, the teachers called to say, we don't know what you're doing, but this is a completely new human being. And keep doing it. And she was a low income mom, by the way, single mom with 4 kids. So she made it work, rice and beans, organic food. And she was calling me at that time because there had just been another school shooting, tragically, in Florida. Remember, that was a big one. And she said, I'm calling you because I want you to know that you need to keep doing what you're doing and saying what you're saying and telling people about the toxins in the food supply and the benefits organic. Because I know that my son, who is now 17, would have been one of those kids to go out to Walmart and buy a gun and shoot kids in a school. And that's a very hard thing for a mother to admit. Very hard, almost impossible, I would think, for some moms. But she said that because she said he won't do that now, because now he's avoiding the toxins and he's eating organic. And I said, you know what you did? You gave your child a new future. And not just your child, but every single kid at that school and their families and their friends, because they're not dealing with that kind of trauma. And you probably gave the whole country a new future, because who knows, your son could run for office. He could invent a new service or a product. You know, when kids live up to their fullest potential, they contribute to the world. And so that's what we're doing here. And that's why I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with you it's about kids and human beings being able to live up to their fullest potential, contribute to the world, live out their life, and make a difference in the world. And so I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation. We have 5 minutes left. And
can we talk about glyphosate? We have a few more slides about
yes, let's open
results
up
on glyphosate.
Whatever we didn't touch upon, please, let's talk about that.
There was the leukemia, and then there's also the neurofilament.
Yes, so we have
chain.
two new studies that we need to talk about. This is a brand new one. Stephanie, why don't you talk us through this one?
Yeah, I mean, this was really amazing because they were looking at rats, and they found these are Sprague-Dawley rats, and they found a lot of them were getting with very low doses, well below the regulatory limits of glyphosate exposure to the rats, caused a lot of young rats got leukemia. This is like childhood leukemia, which has been going up every year for a long time in our country. It's one of the major causes of death in children. And this was these rats. They had half of the rats that got the leukemia were at an unusually young age. And in previous studies of 1,600 rats over the past 2 decades of any kinds of exposures, none of them had acquired leukemia at such a young age. So this is very striking. And a lot of people have picked up on this. I think we have some more, she has some more slides to show about news around this article. Can you pop up some more of those slides that you, so this is glyphosate cancer findings of extreme concern as Europe weighs reauthorization of pesticides, talking about this leukemia result. And then do you have some others? I think if you could just loop through these. Mm-hmm. Shows likely cause of explosion in childhood. This is sustainable pulse. So this is being buzzed around the world in news items, talking about this particular study by this Ramazzini Institute. They have been looking at a lot of different aspects of glyphosate, and I think there's going to be a lot more papers coming out of their research in the coming years. And then I have another paper, which I'm very interested in, from Taiwan. And I think you've got something for that as well, I hope. This is the neurofilament light chain. Yes, this is an amazing study. These are researchers in Taiwan who are looking at NHANES data, which is US data, where they've collected about 1,500 people. They have a whole bunch of data from these people about their health status, about various measures from their blood, and about their just lots and lots of data from both questionnaires and studies of their metrics, of their markers of different things. And so they have, for these people, they have keep that up there for a while, because I think that's going to be useful. They have the glyphosate level in the urine that they were looking at. And then they have this particular metric called the neurofilament light chain. This metric, I know about this because this is linked to many different neurological diseases. And that's where I have a couple of more articles you can pop up here. There's one for autism.
Wait, before you do, Stephanie, can you explain the neuroaxonal damage that it says?
Yeah, well, this is because this neurofilament, is supposed to be in the axons. And what happens is it falls apart. And then the light chain gets out into the circulation. It goes into cerebrospinal fluid. It goes into the blood. And it's well known with many different neurological diseases that you can measure this. In fact, they measure it, for example, in Alzheimer's, to see if their drug is working, it should go down. And so they're looking for this metric to see. It's a marker of how bad your disease is. For Parkinson's disease, autism, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's disease, all of these, they know that they can use this metric, neurofilament light chain, in the blood as an indicator of worse disease. So all of these diseases are manifested by the breaking down of the axons, which are the major communication network of the cells, of the neurons. So this is very, very serious to say that glyphosate is causing those neurons' axons to fall apart and to release this marker into the urine, into the blood circulation. I think it's quite remarkable, this paper, and I hope that it also gets a lot of play on the web, and good for the Taiwanese for doing this. I mean, we need to get more Americans involved in doing these kinds of studies.
So what type of symptoms would you see in someone where their neuroaxonal
damage? Well, that's all these different diseases, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, autism. They're all associated with this marker as
That's
a consequence
pretty much
of
every
the axon falling apart, basically getting damaged.
pretty
Yeah,
much
all
every
the
family
neurological
in
diseases.
America today is
Right,
touched
yes.
by one of those. Yeah.
Probably so.
Oh my goodness. Well, that is a big one. So it is, would you call it then that this says it is a neurotoxin?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And of course, we see these diseases going up. I mean, autism and Alzheimer's both match perfectly. The rise in autism over time, the rise in Alzheimer's over time, that past 20 years, exactly in step with glyphosate, with a rise in glyphosate.
Okay. Well, we've got to start closing up. But any last words, Michelle, about these studies?
Yeah, I would say that, the chronic poisoning of our children with toxic ingredients, their ingredients outweighing the nutrients in our food must stop immediately. And now that we have this evidence, which is just frankly stunning, that this is a massive call to action for immediate protection of our children against toxic food ingredients and to switch to organic regenerative. And the first place to stop is to the removal of glyphosate-based herbicides and not to replace them with other herbicides. That has been the immediate call for action. And the second thing I would say is please get industry out of the school food system, and fast food options. 5-year-olds are not driving to the local Denny's to pick up their meal or Taco Bell, but to have food companies advertising to our children, I think is misguided and needs to stop immediately. So I would say there is hope. We know how to do it. Let's do it.
Okay, great. And Dr. John Fagan, you want to close? Maybe you could say just a sentence or two about your testing methodology as well, or direct people to where to find out more information about that on your website and how accredited your lab is and all of that.
Beautiful. I was going to talk about that earlier. There was so much else to talk about. But basically, our laboratory is accredited to ISO 17025, the internationally recognized standard for analytical laboratories. We're also a FDA clinical laboratory, a CLIA accredited laboratory. And the labs that we outsourced some of these things to also are accredited at these high levels as well. And this makes it very certain that the results are really meaningful and can be relied on and can be the basis for scientific publications, etc. In fact, all of this research should be published, and it could be. You've done a great job doing it on the popular level, but it should be published on the other level as well.
Well, we certainly hope we can do that. And if you want to read anything more about glyphosate, please do get Stephanie Seneff's book, Toxic Legacy. And if you want to learn more about what's making our children sick, get Michelle Perrot's book, What's Making Our Children Sick. And Dr. John Fagan knows all about GMOs, everything you want to know there. So this has been just like a dream team panel for me. I so appreciate all three of you being on. And we're going to be back next month. We're on the last Tuesday of the month, every month at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we have a fabulous guest next month. And in the meantime, please do send us your questions. Do join the Moms Across America newsletter for sure. We are going to be sending out petitions, calls to action. We would love for you to donate to get more testing done. There's so much testing we want to get done. Check out GMO Science as well, Dr. Michelle Perrot's site. She is the host of this fabulous show, and we're so grateful. Yay, we've been doing this for a year. Yay, us. Yay. And thank you to our audience for watching. If you are watching this after we have broadcasted live, please do share it. Please do get this to doctors and scientists and moms and dads and parents and people everywhere who care about their health. Thank you so much for being with us on the show, The New MDs. We hope you have a fantastic Halloween. You're safe. You eat organic candy if you're going to be eating it, and lots of good things to protect your gut microbiome afterwards, like sauerkraut. Get that in your stomach as well. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.